So one of the things that's really important for us, the handler, the human, to learn when we're training and working with our dogs is to keep our hands to ourselves. You know, I do a lot of videos and talk a lot about dogs keep their paws to themselves, don't jump on people, don't grab people. But we often do the exact same thing to our dog, but we call it training. We're pulling on the leash, we're grabbing them by the collar, we're moving their body with our hands or our feet, we're shoving, pushing, dragging, really the same thing, just in reverse. And we do it to get their attention, to try to get them to do something, because we don't think they're listening to us, because they're not following a cue. We have a lot of good reasons why we think we're doing it, but the end result is it's still demanding behavior. It's just us demanding it of the dog. So I wanted to do a quick video just to say we're all guilty of it, myself included. 20 plus years ago, I was a correction-based trainer. All I knew was leash pops and leash corrections. Ironically, as I was shifting over into clicker training, I developed bilateral frozen shoulder, which I had no use of my arms for about 4 years. Between the frozen shoulder and the surgeries that followed, all I could do was really just move my fingers. My arms were frozen in place. So during that time, I was raising service dogs and still training and running my business, but I couldn't use my arms. And I would use a hands-free leash, which was a big belt around my waist, and I would attach the dog's leash to it. I would tether them during training. I would step on their leash, so we still had a leash, but I just put it under my feet, and they would be at the end of it. I did a lot of off-leash work in my house and in my yard, but I was forced by this medical condition to not touch my dogs, to not use my hands. And I really think it was kind of a blessing in disguise, because it was a crash course in keeping my hands to myself. But I think it's a common problem that a lot of people struggle with when they're training their dog. We forget that it's the training that we're doing with our puppy or dog that helps them respond to us. So instead of having to grab Marshall by the collar and drag him towards me, I can use hand targeting. Touch, yes, to get him to come towards me. Instead of dragging him by the collar, I could use come. I could say heel. I could say any number of things to get him to come into my personal space and work closer with me. Instead of using the leash to make him sit or a collar grab to make him sit or pushing his back end down, you just teach him the cues that you want him to learn. Marshall, sit. So again, all these verbal cues that we're teaching our dogs, they have a purpose. It's how we not only communicate with the dog, but we get them to listen to us and to execute behaviors that we want them to. The problem is when we get frustrated or overwhelmed, or we have maybe a super excited dog or an untrained puppy, all of our training tends to go out the window, and we tend to want to fall back on using our hands. Well, I'm going to reel him in like a fish when he isn't coming to me. If he's trying to pull this way, instead of saying his name and getting to look back, I'm going to yank him on the leash and drag him in. I'm going to push his butt down. Oh, he's in class and he won't lay down like the instructor wants, so I'm going to help him a little bit. Push him to the ground. All of these habits become very hard to break for all of us, and trainers included. When we get together and talk, we all joke about it. Yeah, I mean, we have to sometimes remember, put your hands in your pocket, keep your hands to yourself. So it's just important to remember that just like we don't like our dogs pushing and shoving and demanding us to do things, they probably feel the same way. If you're in a class or you're out in public and you ask your dog to sit and they just sort of staring off into space, maybe they're really distracted, maybe they're nervous in that environment, maybe you just haven't practiced enough. Before I take, take my show on the road with my dogs, we practice a lot, and I gradually build up their training in new environments. And I have had my fair share of taking my dog into a new environment, asking them to do something, and I'm like, well, that didn't go so well. I used to joke. There would be times where my dogs would be so amazing. I would take them somewhere. They would just be like superstars, and I would think, oh my gosh, maybe I should write a book. And then I'd take them out the next day, and whatever was going on, they would just tank, just crash and burn right in front of me, and I would be humbled and say, maybe I should read a book. So whether you're a professional dog trainer or just a pet dog handler, whatever your involvement is with your dog, we all have to be mindful of how we are interacting with our dog. And the most wonderful part of using reward-based training, and especially clicker training, is the whole premise is keep your hands off your dog. Train them to follow cues. Train them to understand what it is you want them to do. It's so much more enjoyable to be with a dog that you're not dragging around and yanking around and yelling at them and getting more and more frustrated thinking this dog just doesn't listen. There's probably a lot of reasons why they're not paying attention, but even then, it doesn't help you or your dog to start reverting back to handling techniques that only make your dog more amped up or more stressed out. And it just turns into a very vicious cycle. So if you find yourself working with your dog and things are just not going well, the first thing you need to ask yourself is, do I need to just keep my hands to myself?